Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole, the 4th District of Oklahoma. This is another one of our weekly congressional chats. Congress has actually had a very busy and eventful week, and I think a broadly productive week. Let me talk first about the area that I work in, appropriations. We got another major bill done. That's the Interior Appropriations Bill. It's pretty important in a place like Oklahoma. We do a lot of work on waterways and federal facilities, but particularly on Indian tribes as well. And this district, the bill that we got passed narrowly through the House yesterday, actually, number one, reduces the amount of spending again on this bill, but more importantly, it's underneath it what it shifts. And we move money broadly away from the Environmental Protection Agency and a number of other areas toward people, toward really Native Americans. So there are substantial increases for the Indian Health Service in this bill, which is very important. And of course, a lot of Oklahomans actually get their primary health care through the Indian Health Service, usually in facilities operated by their own tribes, but indirectly funded in large part by federal appropriations. We managed to increase Indian education money, and we increased the basic budget of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So this was actually a very much needed. Usually Native American tribes are neglected, and that's a big part of our economy in Oklahoma. We have 39 federally recognized tribes. They are major employers, number 3 employer in Oklahoma, actually, after aerospace and oil and gas, are Native American tribes. So their prosperity is extremely important to ours. And 16% of our population is made up of tribal citizens. So, this is actually a component of funding that might not be too important in a state like New York or Pennsylvania, but is enormously important to Oklahoma. So if Indian country does better, I promise you Oklahoma does better, because we are such a huge portion of that part of the population. So that was good news. We've now gotten all 12 of our bills out of committee and ready to go to the floor. About 75%, again, of all federal spending has now crossed the House floor. I don't want to take a shot at the United States Senate. I don't mean it that way, but they've only gotten 3 of the 12 bills that are required to get out of committee. None of them have gone across the floor of the United States Senate, and frankly, none of them are likely to go across the floor. So when you hear how chaotic things are in the House, just contrast them to the Senate. We're actually getting our work done. In the Senate, the way they're passing their bills is simply not prioritized. They're going above the amount that we legally agreed to spend in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And so they're spending more money on defense. I like that as a defense hawk, but it's above what the law says they can spend. And they're also then, placating people domestically by not reducing any of that, which we are doing in the House, but again, just adding billions of more. That's not sustainable given the size of the deficits that we're running on an annual basis, and frankly now given the size of the federal debt, which is more and more taking up money in interest payments away from defense. This year we will actually spend more money in interest on our debt than we actually spend to defend the United States of America, which is usually the largest component of our budget. So again, we've made good progress in the House. I'm proud of what we've done. The Senate needs to pick up the pace. Probably in late September, we'll pass what's called a continuing resolution, or a CR. That'll keep funding at the same level. Nobody wants the government to shut down during an election year. And then on the other side of that, we'll finalize the appropriations process if, and this is a big if the new president wants to get the work done in this calendar year. If they want it kicked into next year, that can happen. And we now know we will have a new administration no matter what. Probably either Vice President Harris or former President Trump, one of those two will emerge as the winner. And they're going to have an enormous say in what Congress does post-election and before the inauguration of the new president. So stay tuned on that. But I will tell you, I've publicly stated, obviously, we will do what President Trump wants us to do if he becomes the next president. But my advice to him would be, get this work done. You don't want to come into office with an impending government shutdown And I'd give the same advice to Vice President Harris. You don't want to start your administration. You should push Congress to do its job. And that's exactly what we're trying to do, and I think have made a lot of progress on this year. Second area that I think is very interesting for us was the address of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Israel is, one of our closest friends and allies. It's in an existential fight for its own existence. Obviously on October 7th, Hamas brutally attacked Israel, killed about 12 to 1,300 Israelis. That would be the equivalent of tens of thousands in a country our size. Israel, of course, is tiny, not only geographically, but in terms of population. And the response, of course, the Israelis didn't take that lying down. They went into Gaza, the source of the attack. That's where Hamas is based, and began an effort to dismantle Hamas as a military force. They've made a lot of progress in that, but it's been a bloody affair, a block by block kind of war, and where they've been drawn into tunnels, an extensive tunnel system from which a lot of this was launched. Our country has broadly been supportive of the Israelis. There's still 130 hostages being held, 5 of whom are Americans that we know of. There may be a few more, and we also know some of those are literally people, sadly, that have been killed in this process. Hamas didn't just bring back live hostages, they brought back bodies, and frankly, people being held in the horrific conditions these hostages are being held. No doubt, there've been a number of them killed during this brutal thing. So there was a lot of sympathy, certainly on the Republican side of the aisle, for Prime Minister Netanyahu. The United States has been very supportive in terms of providing arms and assistance. We're closely allied. The Israelis use a lot of American military equipment. They are an enormously effective military in their own right. And we actually developed technology back and forth with the Israelis for air defense, things like the Iron Dome, which allows them to protect their citizens against missile attacks. But again, Iran is really behind all this, and Prime Minister Netanyahu made that point. They're the ones that motivate Hezbollah and Hamas and other terrorist groups, the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the region. They've been very worried that the Israelis and the Arabs are beginning to solve their historic differences. That began really during President Trump's term with the so-called Abraham Accords. This is an effort to disrupt that, to inflame the Muslim world against Israel, and to prevent that emerging alliance between Arab countries and Israel against Iran. Because while Arabs and Iranians have a common faith in Islam, they are very distinct peoples. They're not the same. Iran is the old Persian Empire, to go back to its root. The Arab world, again, is different from that empire. And of course, Israel is different again. So there's a lot of tensions there. This is an effort by Iran to exploit them and prevent a new alignment of power in the Middle East that would probably, hopefully, lead to a more peaceful region. So that was an extraordinary speech, and I think it was very effectively delivered. It was almost like watching a State of the Union address. It wasn't a normal address by a foreign leader. Normally they just come in and they talk to you. This case, Netanyahu brought people that he would introduce in a speech. You see this with presidents of both parties. They'll call him a fireman that's up in the lobby that did something heroic, or a scientist, or a kid that's symbolic of something. In this case, Prime Minister Netanyahu had a hostage who had been freed. He had families of hostages that were still being held, American and Israeli. He had soldiers who had at great sacrifice. One had lost an arm, another had lost a leg. It was incredibly moving. As Prime Minister Netanyahu made the point, look, this is your fight too. These people that attacked us are people that do not wish America well. These are terrorists. These are the same source of people that generated the attackers that killed so many Americans on 9/11. These are the same The Iranians, of course, killed a lot of Americans through IDEs, with these explosive devices during the war in Iraq, and they've been an adversary for well over 40 years now, and in the course of that, lots of Americans have been killed. So he said, our fight is your fight, our enemy is your enemy, and I think that was very persuasive to the great majority. Sadly, there were some Democrats who chose not to come because they're opposed to what Israel's trying to accomplish in Gaza, and I regret that. I think everybody should have come. I try to make as many of these things as I can when a foreign leader comes. I think you do that out of respect to them. I'm disappointed, honestly, that Vice President Harris, who would normally preside over a joint session of Congress along with the Speaker of the House, because the Vice President of the United States is also the President of the Senate, chose not to be there. And I think that was not the appropriate message to send. We should show the United States is united with Israel in a struggle against terrorist states, and that Israel is justified in responding when hundreds of its citizens have been killed and brutalized in the way that occurred on October 7th and has occurred with the hostages that have been held since then. I think their cause is a righteous cause and one of self-defense. This isn't a conflict that they started. This is a conflict that they're trying to finish and free their own people in and free some of our people in. And again, we've been extraordinarily helpful. We've provided billions of dollars of military support, but we've also tried to manipulate them and micromanage their war. There are no American soldiers fighting in this contest. And so we can certainly pick a side and help somebody, but I think you've got to leave the decision-making in the hands of the people that are actually doing the fighting and the dying. And in this case, that's the Israelis, and they're doing it against a terrorist organization. There's a lot of charges aimed at Israel, which I thought Prime Minister Netanyahu answered very well, that they're purposefully killing civilians. They're not. Hamas, quite frankly, places its fighters and its rocket launchers and its military equipment in hospitals and neighborhoods near mosques, things of that nature. They use the civilian population as a shield and then use the resulting deaths to try and turn international opinion against Israel. The Israelis have actually been, according to our experts, extraordinarily careful in trying not to kill innocent civilians. But inevitably, in a war like this, that happens. Urban combat is the most difficult combat at all because there are, by definition, civilians in the area, and they get caught in the crossfires. And again, when one side is trying to use them as human shields rather than protect them, then the casualties are exponentially higher, and that's certainly happened in Gaza. And I'm very sympathetic toward innocent civilians who've been killed in Gaza, but I think the Israelis have tried to avoid doing it. They've not done it purposefully, and you have to remember who started this war, and it certainly wasn't Israel. In this case, it was a horrific attack by Hamas. So that was a very emotional day, and I think largely a unifying day. Prime Minister Netanyahu made a point of praising President Biden for standing by Israel in a difficult time, and obviously the president could veto our efforts to send weapons. He's not done that, quite the opposite. He's been supportive, and Prime Minister Netanyahu made that point, and then he also turned and praised former President Trump for all he'd done during his presidency, everything from supporting the movement of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, recognizing Jerusalem as the historic capital of Israel, recognizing the Golden Heights as an integral part of Israel, and brokering the agreements between the Arab world and the Israelis against a common foe in Iran. So it was an evenly, carefully crafted speech, evenly praising both sides of the political aisle and the support that they've provided. And to be fair, while some Democrats have been critical of Israel, the majority of Democrats have steadfastly supported Israel, just as almost every Republican has. So this is actually an area of bipartisan cooperation. Some conflict, some disagreement, always, that's okay. But America stood very steadfastly with Israel at a difficult time, and I appreciate both my Democratic and Republican colleagues for having done that. So that again was a very amazing moment. Next, last vote we actually cast today was probably political in nature, but I think an important point to make, and that was at the very beginning of the Biden administration, President Biden chose Vice President Harris to be his quote-unquote border czar, or help solve the border problem. We all know that's been a disaster. The Biden administration systematically dismantled the executive orders and the programs that President Trump had put in place on the border that had really given us a much more secure border, many fewer illegal crossings, less drugs coming across our borders, less human trafficking. All that was undone, beginning literally on President Biden's first day. And Vice President Harris has been supportive of that policy, has been put in charge of it by President Biden at various points along the way. So, letting the American people know that the sense of Congress was that Vice President Harris had done a very, very poor job at this and was responsible for some of the chaos at the border was a political point to be made. It was a resolution of Congress. It doesn't actually change anything, but it's an important point to make. And look, I'm not naive enough to think there wasn't a political element here. There was, but again, part of it is making each side take responsibility when they make mistakes. And I think there's no question that the Biden-Harris border policy has been one of the most catastrophic mistakes made by any administration in modern history. So that was, of course, again, a huge point, and we just ended the session on that. We'll now move into the summer break. That's a good thing for me. It'll give me an opportunity to travel around the district, get in touch with my constituents, listen to their concerns, and we're looking forward to having a very aggressive travel schedule during August. I'll also spend some time abroad in Europe, talking to some of the frontline states that are dealing with the Ukrainian issue, where we have a case of naked Russian aggression, and we have a pretty united NATO response in not deploying troops or forces in Ukraine. We don't want to go nose to nose, but we are providing weapons and technical support to the Ukrainians. And so, we'll visit countries like the Czech Republic, like Poland, that are very heavily involved in this effort. And it's an effort where, frankly, while the United States is the biggest single contributor, the reality is we don't contribute the majority of the support here. The European countries have really stepped up. There's over a dozen countries. There's 29 in all, or 31 now, because not only NATO countries, Japan has been a major participant, but there's 31 countries that are providing material support to the Ukrainians, and over a dozen of them have devoted a higher percentage of their national budget and of their gross national product, that is their total wealth, to help Ukraine than we have. So this is actually a case where we've been able to do something that we've talked about a long time, which is getting the Europeans to do more to defend themselves and to contribute more in NATO, something that President Trump pushed very hard. When he became president, only 6 of the NATO countries were meeting their obligation under NATO, which is to provide 2% of your gross national product toward defense. We do over 3. Only 6 countries, again, were doing that when President Trump became president. Now 23 have reached that goal, and we'll have 28 of the 31 countries by the end of next year will have reached that goal. So this is something, again, American presidents have been complaining about for a long time of both parties, but it's actually something where we've been broadly successful. And it's both parties pushing NATO to do more. So again, that's a good thing. But again, we've got a major election coming up, and people are going to have to make some big decisions very shortly about who they want to run the country. And I suspect that'll be very much on the minds of my constituents when I have the chance to visit with them. So again, it's been a productive week. There's been moments of bipartisanship. I would say the Netanyahu moment was a moment of bipartisanship. There's a lot of partisan and institutional differences on the funding fight, but we're moving the ball forward. That is, we're making progress. We're positioning ourselves to negotiate with the Senate and with our Democratic counterparts, and hopefully come to a bipartisan funding solution later. And then, of course, there's just the day-to-day tough politics in an election year, and that's we saw some of that on the floor today. With that, again, I want to wish you well during August. I hope there's some time for you to vacation with family and friends, and to reflect a little bit about how lucky we are as Americans. We're getting ready to make an enormous decision nationally about what we're going to do, who the next president's going to be. We do know we will have definitely a new president come January. This week, of course, literally last night, President Biden he'd already announced he wasn't going to seek re-election. He spoke to the nation about that. But again, it does mean we're going to have a new president no matter what. And that new president will begin making decisions, even though they don't have the authority until January. They'll start making decisions literally immediately after the election that will impact whether Congress gets its work done or not. And I'm hopeful that whoever the new president is, they'll want Congress to finish its job, make sure the government stays open, make the tough decisions that we're all charged to make, and do it in a bipartisan fashion, because there's no way to pass appropriations bills without the two sides bargaining. Democrats control the Senate, Republicans control the House. There is something called the filibuster in the Senate. It means you got to get to 60 votes on every appropriations bill. And the reality is that takes members of both parties submerging their difference. In the House, the majority can usually dictate it if that majority will hang together. But at the end of the day, appropriations bills become bipartisan, and it's important that the work of the country get concluded. With that, again, wish you well, and we may chat to you over the break a little bit. I won't be in Congress. The House will not be in session again until September. The Senate is still in session. Hopefully they'll catch up a little bit on their appropriations work and get some more bills out of committee, and maybe one or two across the floor, so that when we start to negotiate in September, and then probably more definitively in November and December, we get our work done. With that, we'll sign off for now. Good luck and God bless.